Alright, so to follow up on my other video, I have brought a list of fallacies with examples. I haven't described each fallacy in detail, but I will do so before I go into the examples. Alright, so a straw man is where you take your opponent's position and warp it in order to make it easier to attack and defeat. Basically, you end up defeating some sort of straw man instead of your opponent's argument because that's easier. So, for example, when Jim says I like apples but not when they're covered in caramel, that's too sweet for me. Tony says Jim dislikes apples because they're covered in a brown substance. Obviously, he's a racist. Obviously, Jim, we don't know if he's a racist or not. That's why this is a fallacy. It makes no sense and doesn't follow at all. But he's just changed what Jim believes in order to make it easier for him to dismiss Jim as being wrong. Alright, next we have the composition fallacy, where you assume that because something is part of a group, or a group has parts, that therefore all things all properties are the same within the group. So all bananas come from shrubs, therefore all shrubs produce bananas. We know that that is not true, but he asserts it to be because of the first premise. This is why it's a fallacy. Loaded question is not necessarily as much of a fallacy as usually a dick move. Sometimes they're not necessarily wrong, more it's just really rude, but I will go through this real quick. Do you agree that it's important to divert spending from the education system to stop poverty in Africa? No, I think we should spend on education. I bet you want the kids to starve then. But if you take the other answer, I think we should divert spending. Can't you think of the inner city kids you're doing a disservice to? There is no correct way to answer this question, and it is literally posed so that he can call you out on being wrong or immoral. Similar to another very popular loaded question, do you think Black Lives Matter? There is no correct answer to that question because they will try and force you to help them with their activism if you agree. Alright. An appeal to nature is where you decide that because something is natural, it is therefore better. Obviously false, because just because something is natural does not make it superior in any way. The things that are superior are determined to be superior by other methods. Like this all-natural lotion is twice as good as the synthetic lotion because it's natural. It would not be a fallacy if the natural lotion was better because it is better. It's only better if you assert because it is natural. Just like water produced by the combustion of fossil fuels is somehow worse than water produced by cellular respiration. The water is the exact same, you're just saying that because one is produced in a different way, it is somehow different. That is not true. The genetic fallacy is where you decide that because of something's origins or the way it came about, that is what determines whether or not it's good or valid. This fruit came from Florida, therefore it is worse than the fruit that came from California. That is obviously not true, because there is no way to assert that to be true. It could be, but there's no way to say that it is because of that. It does not follow. And then we have Timmy came from a bad neighborhood, that's why all of his opinions are bad. It's not true. His opinions could be bad and he comes from a good neighborhood. Rich people can be just as wrong as poor people, and white people can be just as wrong as black people. It doesn't really matter where it comes from, it matters the validity and soundness. Alright, so the burden of proof is a lot more becoming increasingly common. So it's Timmy was at the park last night, and since you said that you weren't at the park last night, you had to prove you weren't there. Should probably say that he wasn't at the park last night, but we'll fix that. Alright, so Timmy was not at the park last night, and so since he wasn't, he has to prove that he wasn't there. It is almost impossible to prove a negative, which is why this is not only fallacious, but a pretty good trap. There's no way he will ever be able to prove that he was not somewhere unless he can prove that he was indeed somewhere else. Alright. An anecdotal fallacy is where you decide that because of an anecdote, that therefore this applies to a greater case. For example, if you see a KKK member in the South one time, every Southerner is a part of the KKK, or the KKK only exists in the South, or something like that. This may or not be true. I wouldn't know because I don't follow the KKK. But asserting that because of that reasoning is false. I saw a bad comic book movie once, therefore all comic book movies must be bad, or the majority must be bad. You have no way to know that. Your sample size is 1. If you had a broad sample, it would no longer be an anecdote, and therefore it could possibly be valid. Or sound, I guess, in this case. An appeal to emotion is where instead of actually making an argument, you just decide to appeal to people's feelings, where it's feels over reals. So you say, how could you do that? Won't you think of the children? Won't somebody think of the children? Clutch your pearls harder. That's where you appeal to emotion. Or, well, it's just that my opponent is a bigot and racist. Look at how disgusting he is. Look at how awful he is. You're not actually making an argument about anything other than maybe using some ad hominem in there as well. You're just trying to make the audience dislike the person. A middle ground fallacy is where you decide that because two opinions are of opposite spectrums, that the middle must therefore be correct. This is obviously false because one of the people could just be right. Someone says that x is greater than 0, and another person says that x is less than -10, then x equals -5. It's obviously false. What if x is just 1, and you just decide it's -5 for no reason? The other person can just be wrong. If Alex says that all trees are green, and that Stefan says that they're magenta, they're probably like watermelons. No, they're probably not. And ambiguity is when you purposely make a statement ambiguous so that you don't actually know whether or not they meant what they said or they meant something else. This allows them to weasel their way out after the fact. For example, when I said I had $10, I meant 10 Canadian dollars, not 10 US dollars. Obviously. Even though here in the US, everyone would just assume you meant US dollars. And when I said I hated you, I was really just talking to the guy next to you while I was looking at you, but you can't really tell because if you only have the sentence, there's no way to identify who he was really talking to. And for next up is the appeal to authority. When you appeal to authority, you're just saying that because someone is an expert in something, therefore their opinion is correct. A lot of times this can be valid if the expert actually has knowledge and background information that makes it true, or some other form of information that would allow his opinion to be valid. But sometimes, just because somebody is an expert in something does not make them an expert in everything. For our first example, it's because a climatologist says that the theory of relativity is wrong, it must therefore be wrong. Climatologist would obviously probably know very little about the theory of relativity, unless for some reason he's a climatologist physicist, and then I don't really even know. But because he is a climatologist does not make his opinion right. Or, for example, because the president said that it was true, it must be true. The president is not an expert on everything, and just because the president said it was true, that does not make it any more valid than some random pleb said it was true. The No True Scotsman, sometimes called the appeal to purity, is where you say that this part of your group is not actually a part of your group, and no part of your group would ever do that. It's a good way to pretend that the people in your ranks aren't awful while they're quite obviously awful. So you could say that I hate the gays because I'm part of an anti-gay group, but the people that are part of my group that are beating them aren't really part of my group. That's not really us. Even though he has no way to say that these people aren't a part of his group because they are. Or the classic example, especially here on YouTube, is that feminism has nothing to do with misandry, and misandrists aren't real feminists. Whether or not you agree with any of those positions, ideologically speaking, doesn't mean that you can just say that these people aren't a part of our group if that they say they are. That's not how that works. You can't just make your group the most pure because it's convenient. You have to accept the awful people that are part of your group. Alright, so for cherry picking, it's when you either take something out of context or you take something, you quote mine someone, you find like one study or like one data point that agrees with you, or like you find an outlier, therefore all of the data is incorrect, something like that, where you're obviously just distorting data or words or something in order to make an argument. So, for example, one time you said dot 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 some words, Mexicans dot 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 some more words, I dot 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 hate dot 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 them, therefore you hate Mexicans. Even though that doesn't even make any sense, and there could be at least 50 words in between those words. It could even be something where they take a fragment of a sentence that sounds bad, where they could be quoting somebody else, and then they take that to say that this is your opinion. That is obviously false. You cannot just put words in somebody's mouth. And so, if you find one unrepeatable, not reputable study that no one takes seriously that shows that Arabs are actually all evil at one point in time, you just found this and you can't reproduce it, and citation needed, you know, that is an example of cherry picking. The law of small numbers, sometimes called the gambler's fallacy, is the opposite, obviously, of the law of large numbers, which I'll talk about real quick. The law of large numbers is where you have a lot of trials, like maybe 10,000 trials, and then you say that if you flip a coin 10,000 times, it will be roughly 5,000 each. It does not go the other way. The law of small numbers, or the gambler's fallacy, is where because something happened 6 times in a row, that is unlikely, therefore another event that is more likely must happen. This is not true. There is a situation with your 10,000 coin flips where you could flip 5,000 heads and then 5,000 tails, and it would still obey the law of large numbers. There is no such thing as a real statistical rule of the law of small numbers. That would be false. And so, because the last time 10 times I've drawn a card from the deck, it was red, it will be black next time. It will be more likely that it is black, but it will not necessarily be black. Or because the last 100 times I've been wrong, I will be right this time. That's not how it works. If you were wrong last time, maybe you should study. Alright. For an ad hominem, it's when you basically go after the character as an argument. There is one important distinction to make, is an insult is not necessarily an ad hominem. I can say, I think you're shit, and then give a valid reason why I think your argument is shit too, but that doesn't actually mean I committed an ad hominem. An ad hominem is only when I say, because you are bad or some other negative thing, therefore you are wrong. So, for example, you're a bigot, therefore you are wrong that apples taste good. That doesn't make any sense. You could be wrong that apples taste good. The reason cannot be that you are a bigot. Or you smell like shit, therefore you cannot understand physics. That doesn't make any sense because one does not fall from the other. This is more along the lines of a non sequitur. Doesn't even really make any sense how you would get to the conclusion. Alright. For begging the question, that's when you use circular logic, where you have the answer to your question is your initial premise. Therefore, the book says that everything in it is true, therefore everything in the book is true, therefore the book is true. You basically said that because the words say that it is true, and the words are in the book that say the book is true, and therefore the entire book is true, making the words in it true. That's obvious circular reasoning, and circular reasoning is inherently fallacious. Everyone else is wrong, therefore they're wrong about me being wrong, so I'm right. And then he's then right about them being wrong. It's circular reasoning, which does not follow. A bandwagon fallacy is when you assert that because everyone is doing it, that makes it correct, or because everyone thinks something, that makes it correct. The classic example of why this is wrong is you could take heliocentrism. Everyone a long time ago thought that the Earth was the center of the universe and everything rotated around it. We know that the sun is actually we know that the sun is the center of the solar system. Therefore, the Earth cannot be the center of the universe. Go into all that, but basically, we know that just because everyone thinks something is correct, it doesn't make it any more correct. Everyone can just think wrong. So, um, if everyone drinks in college, therefore it must be a good idea. Whether or not you drink in college or not, because everyone is doing it, has nothing to do with whether or not it's a good idea. And if everyone listens to it, the music must be good. That's not how it works. Everyone can listen to really bad music, and that wouldn't make it good. And nobody could listen to good music, but that wouldn't make it bad. The black or white, or all or nothing, or anything kind of like that, the diametric opposition fallacy is where you decide that because there is only two options, therefore any other options are false. So it's that you're either with us or you're against us, or you're either an atheist or a Christian, ignoring that there's many other religions you could possibly be other than an atheist or a Christian. Well, I guess atheism's more like the rejection of religion, but to have them be diametrically opposed. So you could say you're either Christian or a Muslim, but it's like, what if I'm a Jew? And then tu quoque is, other than being hard to say for me because I always trip it up, is that you say that because someone, you just turn your criticism back on the people that are criticizing you. So you say your opinion is wrong. Your opinion is more wrong. I bet it's the most wrong. Really mature way of thinking, and you don't actually accept any of the criticism. You just say that like you're probably worse. And that doesn't really make any sense, nor is it an argument to just say your opponent is less good. Similar to ad hominem. Sorry about that. Alright, so the slippery slope is where you just decide that because one thing might lead to something else, therefore we shouldn't do the first thing without being able to prove that it's going to lead to something else. Like if we allow him to speak at this campus, and there'll be riots in the street and people will die. You have no way of knowing that before the fact, unless he is like planning a riot or something. Therefore, you cannot say that we can't allow him to speak because of that reason. Well, you could say it, but you'd be wrong. And another one would be, if we don't stop this here, then who knows where it'll go. You don't know if it's going to go anywhere, so it doesn't really matter if you stop it here or not, in terms of that. And the fallacy is where you say that because somebody committed a fallacy, they're therefore wrong. This is obviously not true because you can have an invalid argument that is still sound. So therefore, Mike says, I think this is the best plan because everyone is doing it. The plan could still be the best, even though he's committing a bandwagon fallacy. And like Mary points out, Mike, that's a bandwagon fallacy, therefore the plan is bad. That's obviously not true because the plan could still be good, and being a bandwagon has nothing to do with whether or not it's good. Just like recycling might have been a bandwagon at one time, that doesn't make recycling a bad idea. Recycling's a good idea, everyone should do it. Personal incredulity is like where you don't understand how something is, or why it is, or how it comes to be, therefore it is wrong. And so, example, if you're trying, listening into class, if you can even stay awake in physics, say, because we know from Gauss's law, blah, 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 and you say, I don't understand Gauss's law, therefore you're wrong. It's not an argument just because you don't get it. Just arguing that because something is complicated doesn't make it wrong. and sometimes people mistakenly try and apply Occam's razor here, where the simplest solution is most likely the correct solution, which is an important thing to think about. It does not necessarily indicate absolute truth, it's just what is more likely to be true, and it is not always correct either. Alright, so moving the goalposts is where you just decide to, when you're wrong the first time, you just like kind of push back your position until you find one that's like impossible to pin you down on, or you find something that everyone agrees on. So you can say that I think all trees are deciduous, and they're just like, no, actually they're not. You can have all sorts of trees that aren't deciduous, and then they're like, well, all trees are green in the summer, and then you would be hard pressed to find a tree that like the leaves aren't green in the summer. Well, comparatively, I mean, there's things like the Colorado blue spruce, but then when you mention that, he's gonna like move backwards. He's just gonna keep moving back. Like all trees have chlorophyll in them, and you're probably gonna. That's probably actually is true. And so he's just gonna keep moving the posts until he finds something that where he's correct, and then say that actually this is what he meant. Alright, this is the last one, is the post hoc ergo propter hoc, or false cause. Post hoc ergo propter hoc, meaning that because something happened, therefore the thing that happened before caused it. Same with the false cause, where you just assert that something caused something else. Therefore, something would be fallacious, like correlation implies causation. There are many examples of this, where you just find some example of violence or something, and therefore the correlation is strong, and therefore it was caused by something else. You could say that, like, because when teacher salaries are low, crime goes up, therefore all the teachers must be committing all the crimes when the economy is bad. It's obviously not true, but they're connected, because teacher salaries are going to go down when the economy is bad and when crime goes up. Alright, and then because I fell down after you talked to me, you talking to me made me fall. There's a lot more other than these above. There's probably more fallacies, but these are the most common ones, and any fallacy is just any fail in validity for a formal fallacy, or fail in soundness for an informal fallacy. And so there are many other fallacies. A lot of these are just specific types that are easy to see. For example, I didn't go into like non sequiturs, in which some of these were, where the premise just is not does not lead you to the conclusion. Some of these were similar or types of non sequiturs, but it's good to break them down and see how people use them. If you don't understand how people use fallacies to manipulate people and other kinds of devious tactics, then you can easily fall prey to them. Fallacies are common in things like advertising and politics, and so it's important that you avoid fallacies, because fallacies are the easiest way for people to trip you up. If you don't avoid all of these long lists of fallacies, then you are just going to you'll fail to make convincing arguments that will convince a rational thinker. You might convince some random pleb that doesn't really know anything, but that doesn't really mean a whole lot. If you can avoid using fallacies and use good logic, then you're going to be able to convince people of your position. This is the reason why I do not like movements of identity politics or movements of sophistry, where people are not making rational arguments that stand up to facts, or that they have a lot of things where they just assert them, citation needed. And so, if you know how to use rational arguments, you can easily defend yourself against these people. I don't like identity politicians, and I don't want to be a hypocrite and be like one. So if you also do not like that kind of style of argument or that kind of behavior, help yourself by not falling into the trap of using fallacies. Thank you for listening, and have a good day.